what were some of the most challenging experiences for you? And I'm curious as to why they were challenging for you.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, having to, for me, having to engage it's with staff in a different way, in a more humane and friendly way, in a more, and it's not that I wasn't engaging with them or didn't think I was, but actually been forced to think about um, the importance of that interaction, and we're not in a space together.
And what was the challenge for you in that, Damien? I'm curious.
Well, I was very much prepared to, and happy that staff used to break during the daytime for coffee, and have a chat. It wasn't official time, it was something that people used to do. I rarely joined in. I rarely went to join into that space because I was busy and I was doing other things, and it was their space, and it was, I rarely joined in. Um, Now I do. We have a coffee break on a Wednesday, and we all come online and we have our coffee break, and it's been wonderful. It's been, for me, one of the best things about COVID that's happened. I've got to know the staff in ways that I wouldn't have got to know them. Now, and I used to meet them, we used to have lunch, things together. But this ongoing interaction, the challenge for me was to get off the, to stop hiding in my office really and come out and interact, and engage, and to try to make that, and participate in that in a way that was as an equal, not as their manager, but as a fun and equal way. And so to talk about anything other than work really was the key goal. And it was much more comfortable to talk about work, and it's much more comfortable, especially for me and for others maybe, to interact with me in that way. And I'm also the only male in an all-female office. So that was a real challenge, for me to engage in that space, in a way that I felt was, that one, that I didn't dominate it, two, and I wouldn't be left, but that I wouldn't try to, or that I didn't, or mansplain things to people, or try and, but just to try and create a safe environment for people to have fun and to talk about work, if they wanted to, films, movies, what they watched, day-to-day stuff. Some of it, and the interaction, when you find yourself in those spaces, it changes the interaction, of course, because maybe when I'm not there, they talk about other things, that are more related to them and as colleagues and as team members. So, but that was a challenge for me, and to be able to directly interact with people on a Zoom call, it's not easy. You don't know where to be looking, but how, and if people have their cameras down the wrong way, to encourage them to up and sit up, and so you constantly, trying to, and if you're watching people not engaging, you're facilitating that space to try and bring people, draw people in. Because the team meetings then, which we do as well on a weekly basis, they are much more official based, and and some parts of that people don't interact with well, and you're trying to draw in, and you're trying to manage, and learning how to facilitate via Zoom is a whole new skill. It's a whole new other possibility. So, but for me, I'm really thinking about that personal. And I mentioned hiding in my office. Now I didn't see it that way. I was working, but I did take the decision, the active choice, not to go down for the coffee breaks when they were having coffee. Often I would just say I'm too busy, but also try and leave them have a space. But now that uncomfortableness of having to come into that space, I think has paid dividends, and I think for the staff and people have said.
And what would you say is the dividend for you? So what I'm hearing you say is that you're showing up differently with your staff.
Yes, I'm showing up differently. They've seen me in a much more human way, and they've learned more about me, and I've learned more about them. And I think that has really, really created a better environment and a better atmosphere. And that the trust that I talked about earlier, that's begun to build up in a new and different way. Because that for me was important. That sense of people knowing that who we all are, and that we, and I still don't know some of the staff. I still don't know, and that's fine. And that people have to keep their personal, ways themselves. But I think it helps when people know a little bit more about you, and a little bit of what makes you tick outside of work and in those environments. And so it allows for people to be more forgiving of mistakes that we make of each other. It allows for people to be more human towards each other. So yeah, I think it's a small thing, but I think it's paid pay dividends to just that team cohesion.
Okay. I'd like to shift the focus
Yeah.
forward. So when you look to the future, what don't you know about the future?
Oh, lots of things. Don't know anything about the future, but I don't know. Just literally do not know what's going to happen. I suppose the things that worry me or concern me in work wise is that there's been a massive financial cost on the state for COVID-19, and we're an organisation that is primarily funded by state contracts we get from the state to deliver services. I have no doubt as this emerges and the billions and billions in debt that we are in and the money that we borrowed, there is going to be a time when we have to look at cutting back on certain things. And I think the worry is that, people's livelihoods may go in the way that people have the work that we have been able to offer for over 40 years as an organisation some of it may cease because of funding restrictions. And that's a concern. So that's something that I think I can't know. We're trying to figure it out. We're trying to look and read the circumstances. We're trying to create contingency plans and plan A and, have different types of possible solutions and risk assess those. What happens if this goes? What can we do if that goes? What's the likely outcome? And some of those scenarios, there's no possible outcome that looks good, except maybe making sure that staff are kept are supported well in whatever transitions that may occur in that regard. But my sense is, even though Treoir has been around for 40 years, most people in this sector realise that jobs are dependent on funding and that we don't generate our own funding, and even if we can, with the circumstances. So there's a sense that people would be, just as long as they're dealt with fairly and supported, I think people would be understanding of that issue.